This defense, let's start with them because it is an offensive-based discussion. Most of the analysis this week will revolve around stopping this Ole Miss offense. It's fun. It's interesting to watch, all that good stuff, but let's talk about the defense. They are very, very zone-based. I watched them for a full game against Auburn. I don't think I saw a single man clip in that entire study that I did right there. Very few flash players on this football team. Okay, kind of just a bunch of standard dudes, roster top to bottom, except for their linebackers. I do like 4, and I do like 11. 4 is a freshman. He plays like a freshman. Okay, there are times where he flashes like the number 1 football player that they've signed under Lane Kiffin, which is indeed the truth right there, right? But there are times in other situations where he very much so looks like a freshman out there playing defense. The tackling and basic alignment is extremely questionable. Extremely questionable. They have improved under Pete Golding. All right, that is true. All right, but they are a B-minus football team on the defensive side of the football, maybe even a C-plus, with about C-plus talent in the SEC. That's what I would say on that side of the football. And Pete Golding's doing it with a bunch of patchwork assignment on the defensive side of the football. You think USC doesn't do a good enough job stacking their rosters with defensive talent. This football team has 16 transfers, 16 brand new football players on their two deep on the defensive side of the football alone. Okay, so out of 22 football players that go on their two deep, 16 of them just got there this year. That's a lot of new pieces and new parts. You're unfortunately catching them towards the end of the season where they've had an opportunity to kind of remove all the bust and all the missed assignments that they have lining up and showing on tape previously in their beginning parts of the season. However, they still do misalign relatively often. And I saw that even dating back to Pete Golding's years at Alabama. There are certain times in run defense where I'm just like, just alignment doesn't make sense, Pete. Like, why are y'all lining up based off that? There was an explosive against Auburn right before the half that was based off that we showed you in film study. Already talked about number 4 on the defensive side of the football. Let's flip over to the offensive side of the football, what the film says about them. Starts and ends with Ole Miss, with starting the run. It's extremely complex. They're a wide zone football team. They run H insert like Tennessee. They run toss crack like Georgia. They run power like Kentucky does, but except for running the backside guard, they pull backside tackles. Then on top of all of that they do with their running back, who by the way is really, really good, and they have 2 of them, on top of all of that, you have to take into account all the jet sweeps that they do and all the quarterback run game that they do, which is really, really hard to stop. All right, so they do all of this stuff. That's 7 or 8 things that we're talking about just before we get into the fact that, oh, by the way, everything is an RPO, and everything has an ability for the quarterback to run off the top of that. Number 4, Quinshon Judkins is special. He is electric. You wish you would have caught him earlier in the year when he was dealing with an abdomen injury. He's fully healthy, man, and he's ready to go. He will have gashers on Saturday. It's about getting him on the ground. Number 2, Jackson Dart. He's a load. He is a big dude, 6'3", 220 pounds. We've been talking about it. You have to rush this dude with integrity. All right, Auburn did a terrible job the first 2 drives in that football game that we showed you on tape of just getting way too far upfield, rushing on different levels. You got to rush this guy on the same level. You got to mush rush him. And when you get an opportunity, you have to hit this guy. All right, you got to make your hits count on this dude. You got to absolutely blow him up. I don't think this offensive line can hold up athletically. I envision number 11, Jalen Walker, number 35, Damon Wilson, and number 13, Michael Williams, giving this offensive line absolute fits from an athletic standpoint. The last unathletic offensive unit that I've seen look like this was TCU in the national championship game. Glenn Schumann had an absolute field day, twisting, stunting, slanting, doing all kinds of different stuff, making that offensive line play athletic. I wrote it and I talked about it on the film study. They got a bunch of big uglies. They do not have a bunch of big sexies. All right, there is a big difference in this SEC conference. All right, everybody who can't get the big sexies normally plays small. Ole Miss has not done that. They've just recruited big uglies. They got a bunch of 6'5", 360 fat boys up there that can move people every once in a while, but they are not athletically gifted up there on the front end. Trey Harris is a problem. the wide receiver, okay? But he's only a problem 5 or 6 times a game unless you make that something that you can't defend. If you watch them, he is their vertical presence in the passing game, but he is not their go-to guy. He is not somebody that is their security blanket. He is not their safety blanket. He is their firecracker, all right? He is not their gasoline. He is not what the engine runs on. Their engine runs on the running game. But when they take shots to Trey Harris, you better be able to stop him because he is in the slot and he is a problem. He is a mismatch, and he showed that even back during his days as a mid-major opponent before transferring to Ole Miss. And that's a great overview, and that's the overview that I gave you on film. And as I was watching them, and I watched them against Auburn because it was their last away game, all right, and their last important away game in a serious environment. I'm not looking at you, Vanderbilt. It was their last real away game, and it's a great overview that I just gave you. But my primary observation while watching them on film was the fact that they are way, way, way too complicated to have success on the road. All right, that was what I thought. Way too dependent on motion, way too dependent on the window dressing pre-snap, way too dependent on check with me's. And this is how my process works, guys. I sit down, I don't check box scores, I don't look at stats, I don't look at efficiency numbers, I don't do the nerdy shit. I sit down, I watch the film, okay? And I sit there and I stare and I write my notes, I watch a couple games, and I come away with my observations. And then at that point, all right, I come away with my observation, and I go to check the stats after that to see if my observations were either confirmed or they were denied. If they're denied, I got to go back and find out why. I got to go find out whether or not my observation was the outlier or whether or not the stats were the outlier. But something is wrong. But I don't do it any other way. I do it observations off film first. Then what do the stats tell me? I'm going to tell you right now, observations off film tell me that that football team is way too dependent on the complicated, and when you go on the road, you have to simplify the game plan. You got to line up sometimes and be able to beat opponents. So, Jonathan, what do the stats tell me about this football team as a road football team? Because I'm going to tell you right now, the film tells me there's no way this is sustainable to believe that they can do this on the road as effectively as they do at home when the environment is nice and calm. What say the stats?
The stats absolutely confirm that. They are about 20 points fewer.
20?
A 20-point difference on the road versus home games. They're averaging 45.7 points per game at home this season. They're averaging just 25 points on the road this season. Another number that has a huge difference, nearly 200-yard difference in total yards of offense this season versus home games and away games. 536.8 at home, 363 on the dot on the road this season.
And I know what a lot of people will say. Well, but Brooks, they play all of the garbage teams at home. They play all of their non-conference, non-Power 5 teams at home. Yeah, you'd be correct, except they played Tulane on the road this year. And Tulane was one of these defenses that gave them problems. This is an offense, guys, that gets bothered by road environments. Granted, they play in some extremely hostile ones. But we're talking about 20 points per game. 20 points per game worse on the road. And the big one you talked about, 200 yards per game. Dude, that's 2 football lengths of yardage that they are worse on the road. That's not good.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty consistent over the last 2 years as well. Over the last 2 years, there's about a 12-point difference in points per game on home versus road games. So that's 13 home games versus 9 road games over the last 2 years. Plus, they're averaging more penalties per game on the road this year as well versus home games.
Just a singular penalty, I think, is what
it
you
is.
texted
But
the
they're
chat.
one of the most penalized teams in the country in general anyways.
And I would imagine my personal film observations, and you're not going to be able to check this because we can't figure out which penalties are which unless we're digging game logs, and I'm not going to make you do that. This is a really, really false start heavy football team. Okay, they're doing a lot of check with me's, a lot of claps, a lot of pre-snap motions, a lot of, hey, let's show this motion, let's get set, let's check with the line of or check with the sideline, let's get everything recalled. Now let's clap again. And with a lot of new transfers in there, all right, you're going to experience false starts. You're going to experience problems. Again, we joke about it every week. I tell you, you got to show up. You got to be loud. This week is for real. This week you got to show up, and you can really impact the football game. You got something?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's kind of what Georgia crowds have had to do all season. It's been you have to come in and disrupt these offenses. You did it last year against Tennessee, so you kind of have to live up to that hype of you made last year of hindering this opponent's offense.
Again, 20 points per game worse over the last 2 seasons 20 and 14. In the middle is 17 points. They're 17 points worse on the road over a 2 full season span of data on this Ole Miss offense. That's staggering. Also, by the way, Jackson Dart, 4 interceptions on their year. You guessed it, all 4 on the road. I'm just telling you, man, I haven't looked at film and come away and done that and had a boom. Yep, you're 100% right, like we have right there in a minute.
Yeah, as soon as I think I was kind of already doing this a little bit, but then when you texted me specifically about it and was like, this is what I'm seeing, what are you seeing? So then I was like, I got to break it down fully from road and away. And when I saw those numbers, I mean, I immediately texted you like, yeah, it's a massive difference.
I can't believe no one else has caught on to this.
No one's in the weeds.
Yeah, ain't nobody grinding that tape. I'm going to tell you that right now. Not like we do it. Maybe some highlight clips every once in a while. You can't find these tendencies unless you're fully going like play by play, quarter to quarter. I think some people get frustrated with the way that we do film. I think some people watch us and they're like 45 minutes. Why'd you show me these? It all builds, man. Game plans build. By the way, it's like we go through the game chart and the momentum and the swings of the game change how we go about playing the football game. By the way, something that I left out of the film observations that you need to be wary of. From the moment Ole Miss crosses their own 40-yard line, they're in 4-down territory. They will not be punting. They will not be kicking field goals. They will be going for it on 4th down. Anything north of 4th and 3, they're going for it right now. So on 3rd and 7, understand everything is at play. It's 2nd and 7. I thought Auburn did a terrible job to start that football game of not realizing who they were playing. Understand who you're playing. You're playing a fourth down football team in Ole Miss.